Hello, I'm Joe Silva, and this is a video essay on combat storytelling in World War II films. Today I'll be looking at 4 pieces of film about the Second World War: Band of Brothers, The Pacific, Saving Private Ryan, and Hacksaw Ridge. I'll be looking at the similarities and differences in the storytelling of long-form miniseries versus singular feature films, as well as the similarities and differences of stories set in the European theater of combat and the Pacific theater of combat. Band of Brothers, the 2001 HBO 10-episode miniseries set in the European theater, follows the story of Easy Company, an airborne regiment through its journey from training to D-Day to the end of the war in Germany. Saving Private Ryan, the 1998 feature film directed by Steven Spielberg, is also set in the European theater and features the airborne, but its main plot is on a rescue mission to save a young soldier who is the last of his family. The Pacific is a 10-episode 2010 HBO miniseries set in the Pacific Theater revolving around the 1st Marines and some of their most famous soldiers. Finally, Hacksaw Ridge is a 2016 feature film directed by Mel Gibson that follows a conscientious objector serving as an army medic in the Pacific Theater. First, let's compare and contrast the 2 European theater films, Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. Derek Paget and Stephen Lipkin assert that in making Band of Brothers, Spielberg and Hanks were able to capitalize, literally and metaphorically, on the success of Saving Private Ryan, and also to extend its reach through the potential a long-form television series has to develop a larger narrative canvas with a wider group of characters. This is the biggest storytelling difference between the 2 mediums. Length allows more time to explore more characters. Saving Private Ryan features a handful of main characters and a handful more of side characters that we get to know to varying degrees throughout the 2.5 hours of movie. But Band of Brothers has over 10 hours to get to know and care for the 50-odd main characters. Simply put, more stories can be told in a miniseries than in a feature film. Again, Paget and Lipkin compared the 2, this time discussing the differences in the film's witnesses. The witnesses in Band of Brothers are survivors. Band of Brothers, we believe, achieves something genuinely innovative. It re-articulates the figure of the survivor, allowing memorialization to become testimony-led. Saving Private Ryan also presented a now figure to set against those portrayed living and dying then. The older Ryan, aware in this setting of death that he has lived a life the others were never permitted, articulates an archetypal survivor's guilt when he begs his wife,
"Tell me I'm a good man."
The film's project is to attempt to memorialize, and in so doing reassess goodness of, and in, war. But the older Ryan, Hamilton Young, and the younger Ryan, Matt Damon, are both actors. In Band of Brothers, by contrast, the testimony of the veterans that begins each episode adds a sober, documentary frame lacking in the cinema feature. There is no need for the "tell me I've been a good man" emotional imperative of the feature film. An audience must judge what sort of men these are from their self-presentation, their physical address to the camera, and the words they speak. The miniseries features the real men telling their real stories, while the film, though it takes inspiration from real events, is largely the creation of a screenwriter's imagination. Both, of course, are set in the European theater and feature similar landscapes of the French countryside, although Saving Private Ryan ventures onto the beach invasions of D-Day, while Band of Brothers continues onwards into the Dutch and German landscapes throughout different seasons. Co-director of photography, Remy Adolphaersen, said that the approach, handed down from Spielberg and Hanks, was dropping a documentary unit into the past. Here, the differences between the miniseries and the movie are apparent. The miniseries serves more as a documentary, whereas the movie is a traditional war story, overtly created by writers. Maraf Hassan Jr. tackles the larger questions behind the films. Although the producers of the film never delve into the question of just who started the war or why Normandy had to be invaded, we get the message that even skeptical soldiers shared some unique bonding experiences. This is another key difference between the miniseries and the film. While Saving Private Ryan avoids these questions, Band of Brothers has the time to tackle them, spending a portion of the 1st episode on the planning of the D-Day invasion, as well as the 9th episode being titled Why We Fight, and is a look at the overall reason for the war in the bigger picture, fighting fascism and freeing Europe. Now we move on to the 2 Pacific theater films, Hacksaw Ridge and The Pacific. Once again, we see the differences in amount of characters. Hacksaw Ridge follows our singular protagonist and a handful of his friend and fellow soldiers. The Pacific follows this pattern, but a few times over with different groups of Marines as the war progresses. 3 main protagonists and their groups of friends are switched in and out. In the Pacific, the cameraman agreed to film all combat scenes handheld style, a style modeled on the frontline footage shot by war correspondents at the time. Hacksaw Ridge also uses handheld shots during combat scenes, but often the use of slow motion takes away from the shaky realness of the shots, inserting a more smooth, classical Hollywood feel to the action. The settings feel largely similar: Japanese-occupied islands of sand and coral, rocky terrain, and cave systems. The Pacific ventures to several different islands, some including jungles, but all having the same island feel. Whereas Hacksaw Ridge is on one island, and its only landscape change is when our protagonist ventures into the subterranean cave systems of the ridge. Even within the two miniseries, there are storytelling differences. Remy Adasfarisen compared working on the two by bringing up the cultural differences of the intended audiences, Americans pre and during 9/11 and Americans post 9/11. He said, "You know, the world can be pretty terrible. We made Band of Brothers before 9/11, and the world today is such a meaner, more wicked place. The Pacific seems to me to reflect the world as it is now, as much as it shows what happened so many years ago. That's why it's such a powerful piece." There is an added layer of subtext revolving around how 9/11 impacted the creation of these two miniseries. Band of Brothers' first two episodes premiered only a week before the attacks of September 11th, and thus the series' message was received by an audience largely seeking guidance in a troubling time. The Pacific was then made years after, for an audience that has come to terms with the attack themselves and understands the after effects of something so disastrous. Band of Brothers follows a single unit, Easy Company, while the Pacific follows different groups of First Marines, tenuously connected by location or singular man. No character is in all 10 episodes of Pacific, and in many of the main characters can go several episodes without being included. This differs from Band of Brothers, whose cast only changes when someone dies or is sent home and is replaced with a new man. Many of the characters are in all 10 episodes, providing a sort of anchor point for the audience. The Pacific goes beyond the war, the final episode taking place after the war's end, as the surviving protagonists return home and deal with the horror and trauma of what they've seen and done. The Pacific shows the adjustment periods of the characters as they deal with rejoining society with survivor's guilt and PTSD. It is a more somber ending, showing that the suffering did not end when the gunfire did. By contrast, Band of Brothers ends at the war's end, the after-war lives of the characters reduced to a few sentences each of voiceover. In Band of Brothers, we end on a high note. Victory has been achieved, and we learn of the men's happy lives while they play a game of baseball, smiling and laughing together. Likewise, there are also storytelling differences between the two feature films. Elizabeth Flux highlighted a difference in message between the two films. Viewers come to these films with their own feelings and biases about war and its ethical soundness, then have these feelings and biases confirmed by what they choose to see on screen. Films set predominantly in the thick of battle tend to maintain this lack of political commentary, i.e. Saving Private Ryan. Pull no punches when it comes to dramatizing the horrors and gore of war. Yet equally they highlight the honor and glory of individuals, underscoring camaraderie formed in the crucible of conflict. Instead, it is the films that hover around the peripheries of war, those that focus on character and the world beyond the front line, that make more solid statements. While Saving Private Ryan focuses on the consequences of the battles, the short-term effects on the soldiers, and the honor of their deeds, Hacksaw Ridge provides a larger commentary on war in general, even featuring a character who is still mentally scarred from the First World War. The film delves in the protagonist's reasoning for wanting to serve, even if he is a pacifist who refuses to take up arms. To him, war is horrible, but he still wants to serve the cause and help others because he feels the war is for good reasons. So, what does all this mean? And why does it matter? Ultimately, we can boil down the four films to this. Band of Brothers, a long-form story of brotherhood throughout horror, framed as a documentary about real heroes. Saving Private Ryan, a feature film about the terror of war and its power of trauma bonding the made-up heroes. The Pacific, a long-form documentary about the trauma of combat and its lasting effects on the real heroes who fought in it. Hacksaw Ridge, a feature film about a real hero who saved so many and made it through the awful battles without ever firing a shot. Albert Oster said, "It is the collective memory of terror, pain, and sacrifice of the men who swept ashore on that first day at Omaha Beach that sets the tone of Saving Private Ryan, and stamps it from the start with the seal of heroism and of America's ultimate triumph in World War II." This quote rings true for each of the four filmic works, and though they have many differences in storytelling, they ultimately each tell a story important to the combat film genre. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.